From the Lincoln Journal-Star, this is the Life in the Red podcast with Luke Mullin and Amie Just.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Life in the Red podcast. Luke and Amie with you as usual for another weekly update in Nebraska athletics. And as we come to you, it's October. Still doesn't feel like it. We had one of the weirdest home games in Nebraska football history in terms of the weather this last weekend.
Oh, yeah. It was bizarre. Wild stat from Nebraska athletics. Hottest game in Memorial Stadium since at least 1985, when they started keeping track of that. And you would think that record would be held by, I don't know, an August game, a September game. No, October. Because nothing makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a unique one, warm, windy, quite the weather conditions, but we're getting there to fall weather. We'll get into that recap here, that football game here in a moment, but quickly around other Husker sports, updating you, soccer team currently in the midst of a 3-game stretch on the road, drew Wisconsin 2-2 this weekend, and they are at Rutgers on Thursday, at Maryland on Sunday, out there on the East Coast. And if you're looking for any volleyball updates for you, none right now. Full volleyball podcast incoming. We'll have Brent Wagner with us to join in and break down some recent wins for the volleyball team. So look forward to that. But getting into this win over Rutgers, we'll get through that quick before we get on to kind of our big picture midseason review of this Nebraska football team. But I mean, really, 14-7, you look at the score and you're like, oh, this game should have been close the whole way. I mean, it was not the way that game played out. Nebraska dominated that game. Rutgers almost 56 minutes without scoring in that one.
Yeah, it never felt particularly close until like the very, very end. Felt like Nebraska had that one all the way through, and they ultimately did. But there were some great points in that game. The defense, especially that goal line stand, 6 different tries. Rutgers had to get the ball in the end zone. They failed every time. Some of Brian Buschini's punts, incredible. The fake punt that he executed was, I think, my favorite play of the season. There were some not so great things, right? Dylan's interception. The offense didn't do a ton of what we've been used to them doing, right? So definitely a different game from that aspect.
Yeah, it was definitely kind of a slow burn. You know, the offense, they had a couple of those really good drives, those 2 touchdown drives, but just touch and go, you know, had a few of those 3 and outs, you know, not always in that rhythm, and didn't get a whole lot, you know, out of their ground game. Just not a whole lot of yardage in this one in total. I think both teams were under 300 yards. So it was a defensive oriented game. And for Nebraska, it was huge. Matt Rule kind of spoke about the in-game adjustments that Tony White had made, you know, shaking up the personnel, because the first quarter, Rutgers, I mean, they were running the ball really well, and the weather played into it, you know, with the ability to run versus when you wanted to throw it. But Nebraska, I mean, they locked up on that interior and they shut down that run game those next 3 quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. It felt like Rutgers could not do anything offensively in the second, third, and fourth quarters of the game for the most part, right? Definitely different, but yeah, you've got to hand it to him. The Rutgers rush attack is really potent. Even after last week's game, it's still number 2 in the Big Ten. So a job well done for Nebraska.
Yeah, and I mean, with that, that's how that goal line stand was so huge, because you're not talking about going up against a team that struggles, you know, to get 1 yard or 2 on the ground. I mean, that's a Rutgers team that does that so well. And, you know, Nebraska holding them off. Deshaun Singleton had that huge tackle there at the goal line. I mean, obviously those interior runs, I mean, they're right there on the goal line. But I mean, that pass, I mean, that goes for a touchdown. The vast majority of the time, Deshaun makes that touchdown saving tackle. So huge there. And really, you know, a case for this Nebraska team where special teams, you know, outside of those Brian Buschini moments, I mean, they had a bad day. The offense had a bad day. I mean, the defense won that game for Nebraska.
I argue that Brian Buschini won that game for Nebraska. But
that's fair. I mean, you can definitely, those 2 plays, as you mentioned, the fake punt and then that punt he had to completely flip the field there at the end. They don't win the game without those 2 plays. So
they do not. Feel like a black shirt might be is in his locker.
Yeah, talk about a guy who took a hit too.
Jeez,
man,
Louise.
On that first block punt. I mean, he was laying face down there on the turf. You wrote about it after the game too. It was like, we're watching him go to the medical tent. Camden Cook was getting warmed up. It was like, Brian Buschini going to leave this game? He said afterwards, there's no chance he was leaving the game.
No, like they would have to pull him.
Yeah.
For him to leave, or like he'd have to like lose feeling in his leg or something like insane like that, and maybe then he wouldn't like even leave the game. Like he's just a different kind of dude. They build him different in Helena.
Yeah, got to drag him off the field probably to get him out of there. But Nebraska with this win, coming to the midway point of its season, good time for a bye week. At that exact midpoint, 5-1 is the record. Considering their 5-win team last year, I think you should feel pretty good about that. But just, in the context of this team and the journey they're on, I mean, 5-1 through 6 weeks, how do you think they should feel about that?
They should feel really good about that, other than I know that Illinois loss haunts them.
Yeah.
Ty, still upset about it. Matt Rule, still upset about it. They knew they had that in the bag, and they just made some very dumb mistakes that were incredibly costly.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this 5-1 record, it's a really good spot for this team to be at. And I think it is kind of, as you said, a testament how far they've come, that like, yeah, they were so close to that win. I mean, that's eating them up that they were that close, those 1-score game, that one evaded them. But coming back, beating Purdue, beating Rutgers does put them in a very strong spot. And as we review this team, our midseason review, let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Pretty average, the run game so far this year. They're 90th nationally, 136.7 yards per game. No game with a 100-yard rusher. It's been a group that's done it by committee. So, it's not all been, hey, one person's not getting the job done. They've been good in bunches, but it's not been a ground game that you go in every week saying, okay, they're going to run the ball consistently this week. No doubt about it.
Yeah, they need to run it more. And whether that's with Dante or Ramir or Emmett or, I don't know, Ja'Cory, Janirin, and I think how diversified that this offense is, it's a great thing, but it's also like on the flip side, a detriment to some of those guys, because you can't get everybody the touches that they deserve.
Yeah, very obvious there at that running back position, where coming into the year, we knew there would be an odd man out in that rotation. I'll count myself, I'll say it. I did not think it was going to be Gabe Irvin.
Nope, me either.
Who was going to be the guy out of this rotation. But through 4 games, this is how the rushing attempts have broken down. Dante Dowdell, 74 rushing attempts. Ramir Johnson, 36. Emmett Johnson, 35. Gabe Irvin, just 12. A lot of those, in the third and fourth quarters of those early season games. And of course, there's been touches. Yeah.
Some red zone touches for Gabe as well.
Mm-hmm. There's been touches in the passing game for both those guys too. But clearly you see Dante Dowdell, he's that lead runner. You get Ramir and Emmett as kind of those change of pace backs. And both have had their moments. We've seen Emmett get more and more playing time these last 2 weeks as well. This is just a situation that feels to me like going into the season, right? We heard Marcus Satterfield say it, heard Matt Rule say it. We don't want 4 backs. We want a guy to come emerge, be that lead guy. Still feels like 6 weeks we're still kind of treading the same water there.
Yeah, just a little bit. I feel like Gabe is kind of the odd man out, but still, if you have 3 running backs, do you have 1? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and again, it's not like a major criticism. Like
oh,
they've been horrible. It's just
not at all.
It's very odd the way that it's played out. I kind of expected that to you go through the non-con, right? You kind of figure it out, but it's not really played out that way. It's been a week-by-week thing, and I guess we'll expect that to continue here in the coming weeks. But the good news for Nebraska is they have thrown the ball at a very decent clip, much better than they were last year. That is for sure. Number 55 passing offense nationally so far. Dylan Raiola has thrown for 1,358 yards, 9 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. And I think this is the best stat, completing 67% of his passes.
It's one of the higher marks in the country.
Yeah, I mean, he's just been efficient leading this offense. We'd spoken about the interceptions, how the first 2 were, maybe not entirely his fault. This last one.
Absolutely, 100%.
He missed the defender. But, I mean, still for a freshman, and that was my big concern going into the year. Like, he's going to throw the ball, he's going to be loose with it. He's going to push it where he shouldn't. And none of that has happened.
No, and I think that of all of the games that he's had, like this 3rd game against Rutgers was the first game where he kind of showed that he was a true freshman, right?
Yeah.
Making that throw as opposed to because he didn't hold it for very long and he didn't really feel the pressure just yet in that moment. I wonder what would have happened if he would have, made the second read on that. But yeah, no, it's he's definitely looked better than you would think a true freshman does, but he's also made some true freshman mistakes.
Yeah, and I think he's been helped out by his supporting cast in a big way. I think this offense has been pretty dramatically improved across the board. Offensive line has been pretty solid in pass protection. They've had some moments definitely getting that surge up front, moving that line of scrimmage. Maybe that Illinois game with the exception there, but they've been very good outside of that. And the pass catchers, again, consistency, that's the thing that they're looking for. But you're talking about guys that know how to get open. I mean, Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nair, Ja'Cory Barney. I mean, these guys have been revelations in this passing offense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You wonder what Nebraska would have looked like with them last year.
Yeah, no kidding. They would have found a way to make some noise.
They would have figured it out. They would have figured it out.
Yeah, but this offense, it's improved in a big way. We'll name our offense and defensive MVP later. Let's start on offense. I'm going Dylan Raiola. He's the obvious pick. He's elevated this offense. Lots of guys around him that do a lot of good stuff, but I think, the consistency of his play is a huge reason why Nebraska's 5-1. But I will say, honorable mention, got to be Ja'Cory Barney for me. Matt Rule kind of said it a couple of weeks ago when he was saying defenses play them differently when Barney's on the field. I mean, he's just a game changer. He's meant a lot to this offense, too.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with those on either account. I think Dylan has had a great start to his first season. I think without him, you look at last year, right? And then again with Ja'Cory, he is so electric. He's been electric since the moment he stepped foot on campus. When we saw him in practice, the first time we were able to watch practice in the spring game, and then that has carried throughout. Kind of selfish. I kind of want him to get the ball more because it's just so fun to watch him. But if I want to give another honorable mention, it would be Dante.
Yeah. And it's not lost on me, too, that those are two true freshmen that I'm saying are pacing the offense so far. So, I mean, credit for the Nebraska coaching staff for getting those guys ready and then trusting them, too, putting them in those moments, those spots to succeed. But as we move to the defensive side of the ball, it's been a really good first 6 games for this group. I mean, you can look at pretty much any metric, and they have good things to say about this Nebraska defense. Top 10 in run defense nationally. They're the only team to not have allowed a rushing touchdown this season. They're number 36 in pass defense, and they're a top 10 team in team sacks. So, I mean, apart from allowing a little bit of passing yardage, I mean, they have been really, really good. The scoring defense is up there, too, and they've done a good job, especially in the first half of games, helping that offense. When they start slow, they can get into it a little bit more. The defense keeping those teams off the board early as well.
Yeah, and when you think about it, most of the pass yards that they allowed were against Colorado.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of an outlier. But yeah, just a great job that they've done. It doesn't matter the stat. I went through all of them the other day, and Nebraska's defense is near the top or at the top in most everything.
Yeah. Well, I was definitely worried about this unit. After the Illinois game, it was like, okay, everything we thought about this defense, has it just been destroyed, in this moment by Illinois? And then it's like, okay, Purdue game goes by, Rutgers game goes by. It's like, they got it figured out. Like, this is a very, very talented defense. Illinois outplayed them on that day, but you look at pretty much, the rest of the schedule and the way it's going to shake out. It's like, this is a defense that is going to keep Nebraska competitive.
Yeah, without question.
Mm-hmm. And one guy that I think is worth shouting out in the secondary, not necessarily as the defensive MVP, but Sayer Wright, the level of play he's brought to this team the last 2 weeks, came away with an interception in this recent one. And I mean, that's cornerback position. Like we were saying before the year, like if Tommy Hill goes down, like who do they play? And this was when Bly Hill was fully out. But we were like, who are they going to play there? And it's like Sayer Wright has just come in and he's looked like every bit the experienced veteran cornerback they needed him to be.
Yeah, and when we were saying that, right, like Sayer wasn't here yet, right? And then Bly was hurt, but now I've really enjoyed watching Sayer. I think I watched the interception that he had this past week like 12 different times because it's just like, how
did it not hit the ground?
Magic.
Really good athleticism.
Yes.
And an eye for the football, we'll say, there from Sayer Wright. But in terms of our overall defensive MVP, I'm going to go with John Bullock. Senior linebacker, has just been so vital. Run game, pass game, whatever it is. He's been on the field. He's been that heart of the defense. Also Ty Robinson, though. I mean, even when he doesn't get through to the quarterback, I mean, he creates that pressure. He makes him worry. The offensive line has to account for him. He's been so impactful, but I think John Bullock in the heart of that defense.
Oh, yeah. There's no question. He leads the team in tackles. He's number 2 on the team in tackles for loss. He's tied for 4th in sacks, and he's 3rd on the team in pass breakups, and he's got an interception. And it's just what doesn't that guy do?
Yeah. Tony White said a couple weeks ago he's playing at an all-conference level, and I tend to agree with him so far. But offense, defense, some of the other aspects of this game for the Nebraska football team we're talking about. Special teams, it's been bad several of these last couple weeks. The kicking game's not really been consistent. Tristan Alvano out, John Hull in. They've had punts blocked. They've had punts that maybe weren't down correctly.
Field goals blocked.
Yep. I guess the question over these next 6 games is what needs to happen on special teams for Nebraska to solve these issues.
Number 1, snapping consistency. We didn't get to see a ton of that this past week because there were no field goals attempted for Nebraska. And then just pegging up protections, whether that's kick, whether that's punt. You need to be technically and fundamentally sound and just doing your job. To be super cliche, do your 1/11th, all of those things, right? It doesn't feel like it's 1 or 2 or 3 people that you can point to on every single missed assignment.
Yeah.
It's something different, someone different every time.
Yeah. It's a unit-wide thing. And it pops up at different moments. I think that's the frustrating thing too, is you get good moments of special team play, and then, suddenly they make that one big mistake and you're like, man, still those same issues cropping up all over again. And the thing that I'm watching for is, you look at this recent win, didn't attempt a field goal. Obviously it's situational, the weather played into things too, but
Yes.
There's definitely ways that you can minimize the impact special teams has on the game if you're really concerned about the unit going out there and doing their job.
Yeah, if you worry about Brian's health, all right, you have Dylan one-step it, right? Or you go for it on 4th down. Nebraska was 3 of 3, including the fake punt on 4th down last week. Some of that was because of the wind, right? But I think Nebraska just needs to be a little aggressive in that area, just knowing that things aren't working in the kicking game. And, depending on where you are on the field, that's a smarter call anyway.
Yep, agreed. Turnovers, though, very good department where Nebraska has improved. Currently +6 in turnover margin. They'd only turned it over 4 times. Again, those are the 3 interceptions from Dylan Raiola. Only 1 fumble, Dante Dowdell.
Season opener against
UTEP, and they haven't fumbled it since. 5 games. Yeah, I know.
Not because I'm rooting for Nebraska.
The coaching staff is furiously.
Not because I'm rooting for Nebraska, because I don't want to write about that storyline anymore.
About the fumble issues, yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot last season, that and all the injuries.
Yep.
So, yeah, they're ranked in the top 25 somewhere in there in turnover margin, which is crazy because they were in the bottom 10 last year.
Yeah, they were horrible. And the thing is, too, 10 takeaways as well. That's almost the season total that they had last year. So it's not just hey, they're doing better in one area. They're doing better in everything. Ball security, punching it out, all the things that this Nebraska coaching staff was talking about for months. They put it into action. But penalties, that's been a blight these last couple of weeks. Matt Rule's talked about it. But do we think, can Nebraska clean it up, or is this just a team that commits a lot of penalties?
They kind of cleaned it up last week. They were only called for 6.
Yeah, I'll say it. It'll depend on the officiating crew. Huh?
Yep, and if they've got LASIK or not. Did I say that out loud? Whoops.
We'll leave it at that. No fines on the Life in the Red podcast, at least.
I'm allowed to criticize the officiating.
Yes, we are. So thankfully we get that respect for our jobs. But also, I think we're talking about the play calling. Marcus Satterfield is something people look at a lot, and I think it's been pretty good so far this year. Last year, they kept throwing those, bubble screen, the passes to the outside.
I love a good bubble screen. but it's predictable when you do it all the time. And I think that this year has been more creative.
Yep.
And I think that there's just been more like input from some of the newcomers in what they like, what works for them. I know that there's a lot of input from Dylan and Ja'Cory and Isaiah and like Jamal. Like they're all contributing to this. That touchdown play for Bonner. Okay, love that, right? I will say if we're gonna lean into the creativity, we need more for Heinrich.
Absolutely. Yep. Can utilize that guy so much as a runner, as a decoy too. That's the other way that they've used him so far. And yeah, I think that Bonner touchdown run, I mean, that was just emblematic to me because, I mean, they've used motion a lot. Ja'Cory Barney, Jalen Lloyd, they motion these guys back and forth, right? Keep the defense on your toes. Then you got Janiron Bonner, a guy who's pretty much always just pulling around and blocking. You give him the ball, and then he's in the end zone. The defense doesn't know.
Well, yeah, no one hasn't. Yeah, they hadn't shown that look, not all season. And now teams have to prepare for that moving forward. Kind of same sort of thing with that, that fake punt, right? Nebraska really hadn't done that. And now you have to be a little leery of them doing it. Just got to defenses with Nebraska's creative play calling. Defenses will be forced to have to think on their toes a little bit. And I don't think they're done. I think Nebraska has plenty more wild things in their playbook that we have yet to see.
Yeah, a lot of tricks left in that bag, but I think it's been pretty good so far. And as we kind of look ahead now to the next 6 games of this Nebraska football season, first question on my mind is, should Nebraska be ranked? Because they were ranked earlier, and I was like, it didn't really feel like a ranked team yet. They come back, a couple weeks goes by. They've just been hanging outside of that top 25, and the only team that they've lost to, Illinois, is a ranked team.
Yeah. I ranked them this week. So I think the reason why Nebraska was on the outside looking in this week is because there is a clear divide among the AP pollsters as to how they evaluated Michigan and USC this week. I dropped both of them out. Some people kept them both in, some only kept Michigan. And I think that's why Nebraska was on the outside looking in. I don't think at this stage in the season, if you have 2 losses, you should be ranked. Obviously, those things can change, right? Like it's fluid, it changes week to week.
Yeah.
But 6 weeks into the season, already 2 losses, I don't think you should be ranked. And if more people had that belief, then I do believe Nebraska would be ranked this week. But that's the beauty of a 60+ person voting panel, is that everybody kind of comes into it with their own thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, they're right there. And I think it's just a case where like that win over Colorado, people thought was huge, early in the year. I mean, Colorado's been good. I mean,
yeah, they haven't lost since. That's the only loss Colorado has this season.
Yeah, but I'm like, they're a very good team. But people then were like, oh, this is huge, and now, they ebbed and flowed for a couple weeks. And, Nebraska hasn't had that like marquee win, that usually jumps that team into the top 25. But they have that big opportunity that will be coming up here after the bye week. The team next up on their schedule, Indiana, they are ranked number 18, also on bye this week. And it's Big Noon Saturday in Bloomington next weekend. Should be fun.
Would you have thought
6
weeks ago that this is what this game would bring?
Absolutely not. Well, it was at Big Ten Media Days, right? Kurt Signetti, he's coming out there, fire blazing. I'm like,
dropping swears at the podium.
I was like, I like this guy. I feel like he's going to do good for Indiana, but I wasn't like, oh yeah, this is a guy who knows his team's going to go 6-0. It was like, he's putting on a show, right? He's putting the spotlight on Indiana. It's like, man, he might have known something that we all didn't.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. No kidding. Well, it just goes to show in the era of the transfer portal that if you have guys that you believe in, and Matt Rule talked about this week, it is much easier to have a quicker turnaround because you don't have to solely build through your recruiting classes anymore straight out of high school and JUCO. You can bring in however many guys you want from your old program, except Matt couldn't do that because he couldn't bring in Christian McCaffrey. It's a point that he made this week.
What do you mean? He got Josh Fleeks.
Stop.
Stop. The Baylor pipeline.
Stop it. Stop it right now. But yeah, again, like it's just a little bit different. And I think that you're starting to see that at Indiana, but also where he got most of those players, James Madison. James Madison also not having a bad start to the season. So
yeah, and I mean we'll have plenty of time next week to scout this Indiana team in depth. But man, they have a good offense. That is going to be a real challenge for this Nebraska team, and it's a good one to wake them up out of this bye week because some difficult games coming up over the second half of the schedule. And as we wrap up this midseason review, let's give a prediction for the folks. 6 games in the books, 6 games left to go. What does Nebraska finish the season with its record at?
9-3.
Is that what you said before the season? Is that a change? Do you remember?
I think that's what I said before the season. I think I predicted that Nebraska would go into Ohio State undefeated. I was wrong on that. But I also thought that Nebraska would lose for sure to USC. That's one I'm kind of on the fence about. I thought they'd probably lose to Wisconsin. I don't think that anymore. So yeah, I'm thinking 9-3, a loss to Ohio State, and then a loss to USC maybe, and then there's another game in there that I think is just not entirely sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 8-4, which is the same record I said before the season. I didn't think that they were going to be undefeated going into this Indiana game, but the game I had circled before the year as the trap game, Purdue, that didn't really play out that way. But I just think I'm still on the fence about this Indiana game. We're more than a week out, but I'm like, Nebraska, that defense, how they play against that offense. Still don't know how it's going to shake out. Yeah, that Ohio State game, that is going to be so difficult. USC, still a lot of question marks about them. And I just think that Iowa, that Black Friday game, that's going to be tough. But
it's going to be cold.
Yeah. But I mean, talking about the range of outcomes here, I do think 9 wins, that is a very real possibility for this team. If one of those games that I mentioned breaks the other way, I mean, they have the capability to win all these games. Obviously, that Ohio State one is incredibly difficult.
They play the games for a reason, Luke. They could technically win that game.
I'm chalking it up as a loss. Sorry, guys.
I mean, I am too, but they play the games for a reason.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt beat Alabama. Anything is possible.
Good point.
Though I don't think Nebraska will win that game, but a win is technically a possibility.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I just think, a little bit more on the pessimistic side of these final 6 games. I think they split it. They go 3-3, finish at 8-4. But certainly the possibility is there for a much more exciting, positive end of that season. And regardless, bowl game is right there on the cards. It's not finalized. It's not in the books yet.
It was, man.
It was 5-3 last year. It was 5-3, not 5-1.
I know, but they just needed one and they couldn't do it. But I do think they get there this year.
Yeah.
I do. And I think it will be next week. But it'll be close. I do think, as we close this out, I think Nebraska's offense is better than Indiana's defense. And I think Nebraska's defense will give Indiana's offense a run for its money. And the game will be decided on special teams.
Yep. Black shirts will have a big role to play as well.
Black shirts plus Brian Puccini, who, if
it's
he does
part of the black shirts.
Yeah. Well, I feel like he got one this week.
We'll wait for the confirmation.
I feel like he got one this week.
It would be fitting. It certainly would be fitting off that big win over Rutgers. But that will do it for our midseason review of this Nebraska football team. Again, a lot of excitement, that 5-1 record. They will be at Indiana for Big Noon Saturday here in 2 weeks' time. But until then, we'll have all the updates for you at journalstar.com. That'll do it for today's episode of Life in the Red podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's Life in the Red podcast. Our theme music is composed by Sasha Indy. The stories continue on journalstar.com.